Which real-life serial killer frightened/disturbed you the most? The railway killer in the late 90s. He rode trains throughout North America and many of his victims were in Texas, where I lived as a teenager. We had railroad tracks just behind our backyard and we frequently saw people riding in open/empty cars. When it became apparent a serial killer was riding on trains in Texas, my parents got the house alarm fixed and then monitored, and my dad slept with a gun near his bed. Richard Chase. Dude thought he was a vampire, and that the government vaporized his blood. The solution? Kill people, and rape some post-mortem, and drink the blood. This one time he was almost caught, so he made himself a baby milkshake on the way. Edit. I believe the correct term would be baby smoothie, since he didn't add anything with milk. Robert Hansen. Champion hunter in Alaska, who would kidnap sex workers, fly them into the wilderness, and then hunt them for sport. I was in Illinois when the Tylenol tampering murders happened. I don't think they ever caught the person responsible. Yes, there have been other more heinous murderers, but this one was scary. East Area rapist, who went on to become the Golden State Killer and we now know as Joseph James Dean Jello. This guy would stalk his victims for weeks leading up to attacks, along with many other houses, while he was working as a police officer. When he attacked he was relentless, and would stay in the house for hours messing with his victims. When cornered he would kill without a second thought. Toolbox killers. The transcript of the tape of Shirley Ledford's torture was one of the most terrifying things I've read. Some sick fucks. I just read about Fred and Rose West, a married couple in the UK, who collectively were among the most prolific serial killers in modern UK history. It is a grim tale of rape and incest and prostitution and brutal murders and dismemberment of family members and random strangers, some of whom they buried in the garden behind their house. It's a fascinating yet horrific story. Golden State Killer, when he would stay in the room. William Boninaka the freeway killer killed my childhood friend in 1980. He was 16. I was 15 at the time and that is too young an age to wrap your head around having a friend a victim of a serial killer. It changed me. The Night Stalker, Richard Ramirez. Did some sick shit. Lived in Los Angeles. A dad and son team caught him in broad daylight. He gives me nightmares. Israel Keys, rapist, serial killer, necrophiliac. He was raised in a militant fundamentalist Christian household, joined the military, then came back to the US, and killed at least 11 people all over the country. He went to extraordinary lengths to not be caught by choosing victims at random, killing far from his home. He would hide kill kits and return years later when he was ready to kill someone in that area. Mr. Cruel, unsolved. He is an Australian serial rapist who abducted and sexually assaulted 3 girls and is the prime suspect of the abduction and murder of another young girl. After sexually assaulting his victims he bathed them carefully to get rid of evidence. One victim described it as like a mother washing a baby. In one case, he took a second set of clothes from the girl's home to dress her before he let her go. This case makes me feel so uneasy. The Axeman of New Orleans basically forced the entire city into playing jazz music so he would spare their lives. Pretty horrific deaths and nobody was ever charged for the killings. BTK. Worked code enforcement, so plenty of access to homes. Prominent church member. Family man. Depraved murderer. Dean Call. I almost puked when reading about the methods of torture he used on little boys. He was such an asshole that his teenage accomplice was the one that killed him, which revealed his 28+ murders to the public. There is a haunting photo of an unidentified victim that was found in his accomplice's property years after they got busted. Nobody has any clue who the kid is, but the image of distress on his face and the toolbox full of torture tools next to him have forever been burned into my mind. Not sure if it's been said yet, but I'm going with Gary Ridgway or the Green River Killer. Dude killed between 50 and 70 women, usually teen runaways or sex workers, by picking them up in his car, smooth talking them, showing them pictures of his son to gain trust, having sex with them, and then strangling them with his bare hands, and dumping them in the forest near Green River, just outside of Seattle. Normal looking mid-30s family man who claimed murdering young women was his career, and bragged about having the most confirmed kills of any American serial killer. David Russell Williams was a local serial killer my family knew. He seemed really nice and never gave off that vibe. I'd say Carla Homolka and Paul Bernardo, just because they were killing people in my hometown. I lived like 2 minutes away from Carla's childhood home. The guy who ate children in the early 20th century and wrote letters to their parents talking about how their asses tasted. Worst killer I've ever read about. Richard Ramirez. Dude was terrifying. The Zodiac, because of the spooky letters and phone calls, and the fact that not many people have basements in California. No question, Richard Speck. He killed those 8 nurses when I was a kid, 9 years old, and I have never forgotten the headlines in the street. Louis Paper showing the pictures of the nurses. It was the scariest thing I had ever seen and it upset me for the longest time. Well, BTK was a family friend / my uncle's Cub Scout leader, so that was alarming. When he was caught I found my uncle drunk and incredibly upset. I asked him if he was alright and all he could say was he taught me the knots he used on those girls. The DC snipers, John Allen Muhammad and John Lee Malvo. Not only were the killings completely random, people filling up with gas or walking in a parking lot, they started to move south, and I was still living in my hometown, Charlottesville, Virginia, so there was the fear they could make it that far south. John Wayne Gacy. He preyed on children and young adults. Ivan Millett. That cunt just came off as a good-intentioned Aussie bloke giving a lift to a foreign hitchhikers, which then he literally brutally murdered in a forest. There's so much uninhabited land here in Australia. The population only takes up 5% of the total land. Freaks me the fuck out to think about all the dead bodies that were never found and never will be found. I just finished Mindhunter the other day, so this question is interesting. It would be the killer of the Atlanta kids. Yeah, they arrested Wayne Williams, but he might not kill all of them. The case was never solved. Terrifying. There's recently been a series in the UK on serial killer Dennis Dees Nelson. A Scottish killer who lived in London and prowled bars and streets for young men to entice back to his flat. He killed many people and was caught after a plumber found human bones and a mass of flesh in the drains. Turned out Dees was dismembering his victims and trying to flush the remains. In his previous flat he would burn and bury the remains, but his second flat was top floor of a 3-story building, so resorted to flushing. The police found the remains of 3 men in beanbags in a wardrobe, as well as under a drawer in the bathroom, and a head in a large cooking pot on the stove. One killing which stood out for me was a young guy Dees found outside his property one day who was unwell. He helped the guy get to the hospital for treatment. Days later, the young man went back to thank Dees for saving his life, stayed for a drink, and Dees drugged, strangled, and dismembered him. This reminded me of Jeffrey Dahmer and the lad who escaped his flat to the police, who then delivered him back to Dahmer's flat. People in the world astound me. There will never be peace whilst people like this exist. The Toy Box Killer transcripts come to mind. If you absolutely want to have your day ruined, this has to be one of the most disturbing, creepiest things ever. David Parker A. would play these tapes for his victims, so they had an idea of what was coming, and to also mentally break them. Hear the start of one tape, to give you an idea. Hello there, bitch. Are you comfortable right now? I doubt it. Wrists and ankles chained. Gagged. Probably blindfolded. You are disoriented and scared too, I would imagine. Perfectly normal, under the circumstances. For a little while, at least, you need to get your shit together and listen to this tape. It is very relevant to your situation. I'm going to tell you, in detail, why you have been kidnapped, what's going to happen to you, and how long you'll be here. I don't know the details of your capture, because this tape is being created July 23, 1993 as a general advisory tape for future female captives. Richard Ramirez. He had no motivation and invaded people's homes. You could avoid some serial killers by staying away from their MO. He was random. I was also in the DC, Northern Virginia area doing construction during the DC sniper. I even got gas at one of the gas stations, where a lady was shot days later. It's a pair actually, the Toolbox Killers, Roy Norris and Lawrence Whitaker. They drove around in their car and they called the Murder Mac and kidnapped, raped, and sadistically tortured women to death. They have recordings of them using pliers to twist girls' nipples, even smashing their bones with a sledgehammer. It's so bad that they use these recordings to desensitize FBI agents. These were the most sickest I've ever heard. Robert Picton. Piece of shit killed poor, street-involved native women. And police knew. I just recently learned about Nathaniel Barjona. Easily the most disturbing criminal I've read about. Today's modern day Albert Fish. Barjona's interest in crime began when he attempted to strangle another child when he was only 7 years old. Eventually the sickness in his mind devolved so far that he would impersonate police officers in order to abduct, sexually harass, or sometimes kill his child victims. He was caught and released by police multiple times and eventually deemed not a credible threat to society. He later moved across the country and began cannibalizing children. It is likely that he fed bits of children to his friends and neighbors during cookouts. Absolutely horrifying case.